The morning fog clung to Boston's cobblestone streets like a burial shroud as Clara Whitmore pressed herself against the cold brick wall of the boarding house, clutching a worn leather valise that held everything she owned. Her fingers trembled as she touched the letter hidden in her coat pocket, a promise of marriage from a rancher in Wyoming territory, a man she'd never met but who represented her only escape from the shadows that haunted these familiar streets. At 26, Clara had already lived more lifetimes than most women her age. The bruises had faded from her pale skin, but the memories of her late husband's rage still echoed in her dreams. Thomas Whitmore had been dead for 3 months now, taken by consumption in a twist of fate that Clara secretly viewed as divine justice. The respectable widow's weeds she wore concealed the relief she felt at his passing, though the shame of what she'd endured, and worse, what she'd allowed, burned deeper than any physical wound. The letter from Samuel Morrison had arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. His advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette had been simple. Honest rancher seeks capable wife for Wyoming homestead. Must be willing to work hard and endure frontier life. Clara had written back immediately, painting herself as a proper widow seeking a fresh start, carefully omitting the darker truths of her marriage. As the first rays of dawn broke through the fog, Clara made her way to the train station. The streets were already beginning to fill with factory workers and merchants, but she kept her head down, avoiding eye contact. In Boston society, she was marked, not by visible scars, but by whispered rumors and knowing looks. The doctor who'd treated her injuries had been discreet, but servants talked, and neighbors had heard too much through thin walls. Meanwhile, 800 miles west in Missouri, Evelyn Hart stood in the doorway of her family's ramshackle farmhouse, watching the sun rise over fields of failed corn. At 19, she possessed the kind of beauty that bloomed even in hardship, golden hair that caught the light, eyes the color of prairie sky, and a spirit that refused to be broken by the poverty that surrounded her. Her father, Jacob Hart, sat slumped at the kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of whiskey his only companion. The farm had been failing for years, each harvest worse than the last, until even the stubborn Missouri soil seemed to have given up hope. Her 3 younger siblings, Sarah, Matthew, and little Annie, still slept in the loft, unaware that their eldest sister was about to abandon them to their fate. The guilt sat heavy in Evelyn's chest. But the letter from Samuel Morrison promised not just escape, but salvation. He'd written of fertile land, healthy cattle, and a prosperous ranch that needed only a woman's touch to make it a true home. More importantly, he'd sent enough money for her passage, money she'd carefully hidden from her father's desperate searching. "You're really going through with this fool notion." Jacob's voice slurred from behind her. He hadn't been truly sober since her mother died 2 winters past, leaving Evelyn to raise the young ones while trying to scratch survival from the unforgiving earth. "It's done, Pa," Evelyn replied without turning. "Mr. Morrison expects me by month's end. Selling yourself to a stranger." He spat. "Your mother would be ashamed." Evelyn's hands clenched into fists, but she kept her voice steady. "Ma would understand doing what needs doing to survive. Maybe I can send money back, help you all get by." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue. She knew whatever money she might send would disappear into whiskey bottles before it could buy bread or seed. But it eased her conscience slightly, this false promise of future aid. 2 days later, both women found themselves at the same way station in Independence, Kansas, where the railroad ended and wagon travel began. The building was rough-hewn and crowded with travelers, merchants, and fortune seekers all preparing for the journey west. Clara had arrived first, her Eastern clothes and refined manners marking her as distinctly out of place among the frontier folk. She stood near the ticket window, consulting with the station master about passage to Wyoming when a young woman with golden hair approached the same window. Evelyn's homespun dress and worn boots spoke of hardship, but she carried herself with a dignity that caught Clara's attention. "I need a passage on the next wagon to Laramie," Evelyn told the station master, producing a carefully folded letter. "Mr. Samuel Morrison has arranged for my travel." Clara's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, meeting Evelyn's surprised gaze. "Did you say Samuel Morrison?" The station master, a grizzled man named Josiah Burke, looked between them with growing amusement. "Well, I'll be hornswoggled. Looks like old Sam's been busier than a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "There must be some mistake," Clara said, her Eastern accent sharp with anxiety. She produced her own letter. "Mr. Morrison is expecting me. We've corresponded for months." Evelyn's face flushed as she examined Clara's letter, comparing it to her own. The handwriting was identical. The promises nearly word for word. "The lying snake," she breathed, her prairie accent thick with anger. "He's been courting us both." Burke scratched his graying beard. "Wouldn't be the first time. These lonely ranchers sometimes cast a wide net, see what fish they catch, though usually they have the sense to space out the arrivals." Clara felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in. The same trapped feeling she'd experienced in her marriage. She'd risked everything on this chance, burned her bridges in Boston, endured the whispers and shame to reach this moment. And now, "I can't go back," she said quietly, more to herself than the others. "Neither can I," Evelyn admitted, surprising herself with the confession. She studied Clara more carefully now, noting the quality of her clothes, the careful way she held herself, the shadows in her gray eyes that spoke of secrets and sorrow. Burke cleared his throat. "Well, ladies, I got a different sort of problem for you. Only got one wagon heading to Wyoming territory this week, and it's leaving at first light tomorrow. Driver's name is Ezekiel Cooper. Crusty old coot, but he knows the trails better than anyone. Thing is, he's only got room for one passenger in the wagon. Everything else is supplies for the army fort." The two women looked at each other, then back at Burke. Clara spoke first. "Surely there must be another way. Next wagon's not for 3 weeks, and that's if the weather holds." Burke shrugged. "Course, you could share the space, if you're willing. Seen stranger things on the frontier, but it's a hard journey. Close quarters for 2 weeks or more. You'd have to come to an understanding." Evelyn and Clara stood in silence, each taking the measure of the other. They were a study in contrasts, one dark and refined, marked by city living and secret sorrows, the other fair and strong, shaped by rural hardship and family duty. Yet, in that moment, they recognized something in each other, the desperate need to escape, to find something better than what they'd left behind. "I suppose we have no choice," Clara said finally. "No," Evelyn agreed. "I suppose we don't." They spent that night in the station's boarding room, sharing an awkward meal and carefully avoiding deeper conversation. Other travelers filled the space with noise and tobacco smoke, but the two women remained islands of silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. As dawn broke over the Kansas prairie, they found Ezekiel Cooper loading the last of the supplies onto a sturdy Conestoga wagon. He was exactly as Burke had described, weathered as old leather, with keen eyes that missed nothing and a permanent squint from years of reading the horizon. "So, you're the two fools heading to Wyoming," he said without preamble. "Burke told me about your situation. Makes no never mind to me if you're both chasing the same man or running from different devils. But I'll tell you straight, this ain't no pleasure ride. We'll be crossing Indian territory, dealing with weather that can kill you 5 different ways, and facing whatever else the good Lord sees fit to throw at us." Clara lifted her chin. "We understand the risks." "Do you now?" Cooper spat tobacco juice to the side. "Can either of you handle a rifle? Know how to make a fire in the rain? Ever seen a man scalped or a woman died from snakebite?" Evelyn stepped forward. "I can shoot well enough to keep the coyotes off our chickens, and I've birthed calves and buried family. Whatever the trail brings, I'll face it." Cooper studied them both for a long moment, then nodded. "Get your belongings loaded. We leave in an hour." The wagon was indeed cramped, filled with barrels of salt pork, ammunition, and other supplies destined for Fort Laramie. Clara and Evelyn carved out a small space among the cargo, their few possessions mingling by necessity. As the wheels began to roll and independence faded behind them, they sat side by side on hard wooden boards, strangers bound by circumstance and a shared destination. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, grass rippling like an ocean in the morning breeze. Cooper rode up front, occasionally calling out landmarks or warnings about rough patches ahead. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning cool and bringing the first taste of the heat that would be their constant companion. "I suppose we should talk about Mr. Morrison," Evelyn said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them since leaving the station. Clara's laugh was bitter. "What's to discuss? We've both been fooled by a man we've never met. It seems I'm destined to repeat my mistakes." "You were married before?" Evelyn asked carefully. "Yes." Clara's response was clipped, discouraging further questions. They lapsed back into silence, but it was a different quality now, not hostile, but thoughtful. As the wagon rolled on and the landscape began to change, both women found themselves stealing glances at their unexpected companion, wondering what stories lay beneath the surface, what dreams and fears had driven them to this moment. As their first night on the trail approached, Cooper found a spot near a small creek to make camp. The women watched as he efficiently unhitched the oxen and began gathering buffalo chips for fuel, his movements practiced from years of repetition. "Best learn to help," he told them gruffly. "Won't be no servants out here." Together, Clara and Evelyn learned to make camp, gathering fuel, hauling water, preparing the simple meal of biscuits and salt pork that would be their staple. As darkness fell across the prairie, they huddled near the fire, listening to the sounds of the wilderness, the distant howl of wolves, the rustle of grass in the wind, the occasional call of night birds. "I've never heard wolves before," Clara admitted quietly, drawing her shawl tighter. "They won't bother us," Evelyn assured her. "They're more afraid of the fire than we are of them." But as the wolf calls grew closer and more numerous, even Evelyn found herself edging nearer to the flames. Cooper sat with his rifle across his knees, tobacco pipe glowing in the darkness, seemingly unbothered by the sounds that sent shivers down both women's spines. "Welcome to the frontier, ladies," he said with what might have been amusement. "This is just the beginning." The third day on the trail brought a change in the weather. What had begun as a cloudless morning quickly transformed as dark clouds gathered on the western horizon, moving toward them with alarming speed. Cooper studied the sky with growing concern, his weathered face creasing into deeper lines. "Storm coming," he announced, urging the oxen to move faster. "And not just any storm. See that yellow tinge to the clouds? That's dust. We need shelter, and we need it quick." Clara and Evelyn exchanged worried glances from their perch in the wagon. They had already learned to trust Cooper's judgment about the prairie's moods. The wind began to pick up, sending their hair whipping about their faces and making the canvas wagon covers snap like a flag in a gale. "There!" Cooper pointed to a line of red rocks jutting from the earth about a mile distant. "We'll make for those bluffs. Hold on tight, ladies. This is going to get rough." As if his words were a signal, the wind suddenly intensified, carrying with it a wall of dust that blocked out the sun. Within moments, day turned to an eerie twilight, and the air became thick with grit that found its way into eyes, nose, and mouth, despite their best efforts to cover their faces. Clara pulled her shawl over her head, but the fine dust penetrated everything. Beside her, Evelyn had torn a strip from her petticoat to tie over her nose and mouth, gesturing for Clara to do the same. In the chaos of the storm, their earlier awkwardness was forgotten as they worked together to secure loose items in the wagon. Cooper fought to control the panicking oxen, his shouts barely audible over the howling wind. The wagon lurched and swayed, threatening to overturn with each gust. Clara gripped the wooden sides until her knuckles went white, while Evelyn braced herself against the supply barrels. "We're not going to make it to the rocks," Evelyn shouted over the storm. But Cooper, through sheer will and decades of experience, managed to guide them into the lee of the bluffs just as the worst of the storm hit. The rocks provided some shelter, but the wind still howled around them, carrying dust and debris that stung like needles against exposed skin. "Everyone out," Cooper commanded. "Get under the wagon." They scrambled down, Cooper helping each woman to the ground before unhitching the oxen and securing them as best he could. The three of them crawled beneath the wagon bed, huddling together as the storm raged above them. The dust was so thick they could barely see each other despite being inches apart. Clara found herself pressed between Cooper and Evelyn, the impropriety of the situation completely overshadowed by the primal need for survival. She could feel Evelyn trembling beside her, whether from fear or cold. She couldn't tell. Without thinking, Clara reached out and took the younger woman's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "My ma used to tell stories about storms like this," Evelyn said, her voice muffled by the cloth over her face. "Said they could strip the paint off a house and the hide off a cow." "Comforting thought," Clara replied dryly, surprising herself with the attempt at humor. Cooper chuckled, a raspy sound that somehow made the situation less terrifying. "Your ma wasn't far wrong. Miss, seen these dust storms bury whole wagons. But we're lucky, this one's moving fast. Should blow over in an hour or two." They waited in their makeshift shelter as the storm battered the wagon above them. Clara found herself thinking about the comfortable house she'd left in Boston, with its solid walls and glass windows that kept out the elements. But then she remembered the other things those walls had trapped inside. The fear, the pain, the suffocating silence after Thomas's rages had passed. "Tell me about Missouri," she said to Evelyn, needing distraction from both the storm and her memories. Evelyn was quiet for a moment, then began to speak, her voice painting pictures of rolling hills and green valleys, of streams running clear and cold in the spring, of fireflies dancing in the summer evenings. She talked about her mother's garden, the old apple tree behind their house, the neighbor's son who'd wanted to court her before the crops failed and dreams dried up like the corn in the fields. "What about Boston?" Evelyn asked when her stories ran dry. Clara hesitated, then found herself describing the city, the gaslit streets, the bustle of commerce, the grand houses on Beacon Hill where she'd worked as a governess before marrying Thomas. She carefully edited her tale, speaking of theater performances and church socials, of ships in the harbor and the smell of the sea on foggy mornings. She didn't mention the locked doors, the bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, or the night she'd stood at the harbor's edge contemplating whether drowning would be better than returning home. The storm gradually began to subside, the howling wind diminishing to a mere moan. When Cooper finally declared it safe to emerge, they crawled out to find a transformed landscape. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust. The wagon looked as if it had aged decades in hours, and the oxen stood patient and sand-covered like ancient statues. "Well," Cooper said, surveying the damage, "we survived. That's what counts." They spent the remainder of the day cleaning dust from everything, shaking out bedrolls and clothing, checking supplies for damage. The shared ordeal had created a bond between the two women. They worked side by side without the earlier stiffness, occasionally catching each other's eyes and sharing weary smiles. That evening, as they made camp in the shelter of the rocks, the sunset was spectacular, the lingering dust in the atmosphere turning the sky into a canvas of orange, pink, and purple. Clara and Evelyn sat together on a flat boulder, watching the display while Cooper tended to the evening meal. "I've never seen anything like it." Clara breathed. "The frontier's like that," Evelyn said. "Terrible and beautiful all at once. It'll kill you if you're not careful, but it can also take your breath away with its glory." Clara studied her companion's profile in the fading light. "You don't seem afraid of it." "Oh, I'm afraid," Evelyn admitted. "But fear's just another thing to endure, isn't it? Like hunger or cold or loneliness. You face it and keep going because stopping means dying, one way or another." Her words resonated deep in Clara's chest. She thought of all the fears she'd faced and the ones still ahead. "Yes," she said quietly. "I suppose it is." The next days passed in a rhythm of travel and rest, the landscape gradually changing as they moved west. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, then to rougher terrain dotted with scrub brush and ancient buffalo wallows. They began to see more wildlife, antelope bounding away from the wagon's approach, hawks circling overhead, and once a small herd of buffalo in the distance that made Cooper reach for his rifle before determining they were too far away to be a threat. During the long hours in the wagon, Clara and Evelyn continued to share stories, gradually revealing more of themselves. Clara learned that Evelyn had essentially raised her siblings after her mother's death, that she could make a meal from almost nothing, and that she had a gift for seeing beauty in the simplest things. Evelyn discovered that Clara could speak French, had read more books than anyone she'd ever met, and possessed a dry wit that emerged more frequently as the days passed. They were 5 days out from the next way station when they encountered other travelers, a small group of wagons heading east. Cooper called a halt to exchange news, as was customary on the trail. The lead wagon was driven by a man named Josiah Holbrook, his face grim with bad news. "Raiders hit a wagon train 2 days west of here," he told Cooper, while Clara and Evelyn listened from their wagon. "Weren't Indians. White men. Deserters from the army, most like. Killed 2 men, took everything of value. We're heading back to Fort Kearny to report it." Cooper spat thoughtfully. "How many?" 5 or 6, from what the survivors said, armed well, knew what they were doing. They're working this stretch of trail, picking off small groups." After Holbrook's party moved on, Cooper was unusually quiet. That night, he showed both women how to load and fire his spare rifle, his instructions terse and practical. "Not trying to scare you," he said, "but you need to be prepared. If something happens to me, you keep moving west. Don't stop for anything or anyone you don't trust completely." Clara handled the rifle awkwardly at first, her city upbringing showing, but she was determined to learn. Evelyn took to it more naturally, her aim steady despite the weapon's weight. "My PA taught me on an old musket," she explained. "Said a woman alone needs to know how to protect herself." That night, Clara was plagued by nightmares. She dreamed of Thomas, but his face kept shifting, becoming the faceless raiders Holbrook had described. She woke, gasping, disoriented in the darkness until she felt Evelyn's hand on her shoulder. "Just a dream," Evelyn whispered. "You're safe." Clara caught her breath, embarrassed by her weakness. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "We all have demons that visit in the night," Evelyn said softly. "No shame in that." They lay in silence for a moment. Then Clara found herself speaking into the darkness. "My husband, he wasn't a good man. I thought marriage would be my escape from servitude, but I only traded one form of bondage for another." Evelyn squeezed her shoulder gently. "He's dead now. He can't hurt you anymore." "No," Clara agreed. "But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever truly be free of him." "You will," Evelyn said with quiet conviction. "Every mile we travel takes you further from what was and closer to what might be. That's what this journey is really about, isn't it? Not about Mr. Morrison or marriage or security. It's about becoming who we're meant to be." Clara turned to face her in the darkness, barely able to make out her features. "You're very wise for someone so young. Hardship ages a person." Evelyn replied, "Inside, I feel ancient sometimes." They talked quietly until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, sharing secrets and fears that seemed safer to voice in darkness. By the time Cooper stirred and began preparing for the day's journey, an understanding had formed between them that went deeper than mere friendship. They were no longer just 2 women forced to share a wagon. They were allies, perhaps even sisters in all but blood, facing an uncertain future together. As the sun rose over the prairie, painting the landscape in shades of gold and green, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. It was fragile, like a butterfly's wing, but it was there. She looked at Evelyn, who was braiding her hair for the day's journey, and wondered if this was what salvation looked like. Not a man's promise in a letter, but the unexpected grace of human connection in the midst of hardship. "Ready for another day, ladies?" Cooper called out, his voice gruff but not unkind. "Ready," they answered in unison, and Clara found that, for the first time in memory, she meant it. The 7th day of their journey began like any other, with Cooper rousing them before dawn and the familiar routine of breaking camp. But by mid-morning, Trouble struck. The wagon lurched violently to one side, accompanied by a sharp crack that made all three of them freeze. "Damn and blast!" Cooper swore, bringing the oxen to a halt. He climbed down to inspect the damage, his expression darkening with each passing moment. Rear axles cracked near through. Must have weakened in that storm. Clara and Evelyn dismounted to see for themselves. The iron-reinforced wood showed a jagged split that threatened to give way completely under the wagon's weight. "Can we fix it?" Clara asked, though she suspected the answer. "Not without proper tools and a blacksmith," Cooper replied, rubbing his grizzled chin. "We're sitting ducks out here like this." The prairie stretched endlessly around them, offering no shelter or aid. They were at least 2 days from the nearest settlement, in territory known for both Indian raids and white outlaws. Cooper set about unloading some of the heavier supplies to ease the strain on the damaged axle. But his movements were tense, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. It was Evelyn who spotted the rider first. "Someone's coming," she said quietly, pointing to a dust cloud approaching from the north. Cooper immediately reached for his rifle, but as the figure drew closer, he relaxed slightly. "Just one man. Still, keep those rifles handy." The rider emerged from the dust like something out of a desert mirage. A tall man on a black horse, moving with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. As he approached, Clara felt her breath catch. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and black hair that needed cutting. His clothes were practical, worn leather chaps, a dust-covered shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. But it was his face that held her attention, strong-jawed and weathered, with dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. An old scar ran from his left cheekbone to his jaw, adding danger to what might otherwise have been called handsome. "Trouble?" the stranger asked, his voice low and measured. He'd stopped his horse a respectful distance away, hands visible and away from the pistol at his hip. "Broken axle," Cooper answered, still wary. "You traveling alone, mister?" "Name's Luke Carson," the man said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that included both women. "I've got a small ranch about 10 miles north. Saw your dust and thought I'd investigate." His eyes lingered on Clara for a moment, then moved to Evelyn, and something in his expression shifted, a flicker of interest quickly suppressed. "Ezekiel Cooper. These ladies are traveling to Wyoming territory." Luke dismounted in one fluid motion, ground-tying his horse before approaching the wagon. He examined the damaged axle with experienced eyes, his large hands gentle but sure as he tested the extent of the crack. "You won't make it another mile on this," he confirmed. "But I might have a solution. My ranch isn't far. I've got tools there. Might be able to shore it up enough to get you to the next town." Cooper and Luke stepped aside to discuss particulars while Clara and Evelyn watched. Clara found herself studying the newcomer, noting the way he moved with economical precision, the quiet authority in his bearing. This was a man comfortable with solitude and self-reliance, shaped by the harsh land he inhabited. "He seems trustworthy enough," Evelyn murmured, and Clara realized the younger woman had been watching Luke just as intently. "Cooper seems to think so," Clara replied, though she couldn't quite explain the flutter of unease, or was it something else, that Luke's presence stirred in her. After some negotiation, it was decided. Luke would help them rig a temporary support for the axle, then guide them to his ranch where proper repairs could be attempted. As the men worked, Luke's shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscled forearms marked by various scars. Clara and Evelyn tried not to stare. "You ladies heading to meet family?" Luke asked as he worked, making conversation. "Husbands," Evelyn answered when Clara remained silent. "Or, rather, one husband. It seems we've both been corresponding with the same man." Luke's hands paused for a moment, and he looked up with raised eyebrows. "That's so, and you're still traveling together." "We've come to an arrangement," Clara said coolly, not liking the hint of amusement in his voice. "No judgment here, ma'am," Luke said, returning to his work. "The frontier makes for strange bedfellows. Pardon the expression. Man gets lonely out here. Might not think straight, though stringing along two ladies seems particularly foolish. Mr. Morrison will have some explaining to do. Evelyn agreed. Morrison? Luke's voice sharpened. Samuel Morrison. Has a spread near Laramie. You know him? Clara asked. Luke's expression darkened. We've had dealings. Well, ladies, I won't speak ill of a man behind his back. You'll form your own opinion soon enough. The temporary repair took nearly 2 hours. By the time they were ready to move, the sun was high overhead, beating down mercilessly. Luke rode alongside the wagon, occasionally scouting ahead, his presence both reassuring and unsettling. As they traveled, he pointed out landmarks and hazards, sharing his knowledge of the land with the easy manner of someone who'd made peace with solitude. Clara noticed how his eyes regularly swept the horizon, never fully relaxing even as he talked. You mentioned raiders earlier, he said to Cooper. The Holbrook party? You heard about that? Word travels. I've been tracking those men for 3 days. They hit a family traveling alone after the wagon train, killed the father, left the mother and children stranded. I got them to safety, but the bastards had already moved on. Begging your pardon, ladies, he added, glancing back at them. No need to apologize for honest anger. Clara said, What happened to the family? Widow and 3 young ones. I took them to Fort Kearny. She was heading back east, had people in Ohio. His jaw tightened. Man brings his family out here trusting in basic human decency. And this is what happens. There was something in his voice, a personal edge to the anger that suggested deeper wounds. Evelyn leaned forward slightly. You seem to take it personally, Mr. Carson. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Lost my own family to raiders 5 years back, he said finally. Different group, but same result. Wife and daughter, coming to join me from Kansas. I was building our homestead, getting everything ready. He trailed off, lost in memory. I'm so sorry, Clara said softly, understanding now the solitary life, the watchful eyes, the way he tensed when discussing the raiders. It was a long time ago, Luke said, though his tone suggested otherwise. But it's why I make it my business to help travelers when I can, and why I won't stand by when animals prey on innocent folks. They reached Luke's ranch as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen. It was a modest but well-maintained operation, a solid cabin of logs and stone, a barn that had seen better days but still stood strong, corrals holding a dozen horses, and a small herd of cattle grazing in the distance. It's not much, Luke said, a note of apology in his voice as he helped the women down from the wagon. But you're welcome to rest here while Cooper and I work on that axle. The inside of the cabin was sparse but clean, a single large room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a surprising number of books on a shelf by the window. Clara noticed there were no feminine touches, no photographs or mementos, as if Luke had stripped away anything that might remind him of his losses. While the men worked in the barn, Clara and Evelyn prepared a meal from Luke's stores and their own supplies. It felt strange to be in a real kitchen again after days of campfire cooking, and they found themselves working in comfortable synchronization. He's not what I expected, Evelyn said, kneading biscuit dough. What did you expect? I don't know. Someone rougher, I suppose. Less. She searched for the word. Civilized. Clara understood what she meant. Despite his dangerous appearance and tragic past, there was a gentleness to Luke, a careful way he moved around them as if afraid his very presence might cause harm. When the men returned, covered in grease and sweat but triumphant, the cabin filled with the aroma of stew and fresh biscuits, Luke stopped in the doorway, something flickering across his face. Pain, perhaps, or memory. Haven't smelled anything that good in years, he said quietly. They ate together around his rough table, conversation flowing more easily as the meal progressed. Luke proved to be well-read and thoughtful, able to discuss everything from cattle breeding to Shakespeare with equal facility. Clara found herself drawn into debate about a recent novel they'd both read, while Evelyn contributed sharp observations that revealed her quick intelligence. As night fell, Luke insisted the women take his cabin while he and Cooper bunked in the barn. Wouldn't be proper otherwise, he said firmly, brooking no argument, before retiring. Clara stepped outside for air and found Luke sitting on the porch, smoking a pipe and watching the stars. The night was clear, the sky a vast canvas of light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, making room for her on the bench. "Too much to think about," Clara admitted, settling beside him. "This journey, what waits at the end of it? Having second thoughts about Morrison?" Clara laughed softly. "I've had second thoughts since discovering Evelyn's existence. Now I'm on to third and fourth thoughts." "For what it's worth," Luke said carefully, "Morrison's not a bad man, exactly, just weak. Makes promises he can't keep, tells people what they want to hear. You and Miss Hart deserve better." "And what would better look like, Mr. Carson?" He turned to study her in the starlight, and Clara felt her heart skip. "Someone who says what he means, who understands that strength isn't about controlling others, but protecting them. Someone who's learned that loneliness is better than false company, but true companionship is worth any risk." The air between them crackled with unspoken possibility. Clara found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by something more than mere attraction. Here was a man who'd known loss, who understood that survival sometimes meant simply enduring another day. "Clara," Evelyn's voice called from inside. "Are you all right?" The spell broke. Clara stood quickly, smoothing her skirts. "I should go. Thank you, Mr. Carson, for your hospitality." "Luke," he said. "Just Luke." Inside, Clara found Evelyn sitting up in the borrowed bed, her face troubled. "I couldn't sleep either. Too strange being under a roof again." Clara sat beside her, and they talked quietly about inconsequential things, but both were aware of what went unspoken. The way Luke's presence had shifted something between them, adding a new complexity to their already unusual situation. "He's a good man," Evelyn said finally. "You can see it in how he's arranged everything here. Careful, thoughtful, and the way he looked at you. He looked at you too." Clara interrupted. "I saw it." They regarded each other in the lamplight. Two women who'd become friends through necessity, now facing a different kind of challenge. Somewhere in the darkness outside, a wolf howled, long and mournful, and was answered by another. Two mail-order brides shared one wagon, Evelyn said with a rueful smile, and fought desire for the same fierce cowboy. Clara couldn't help but laugh, though it was tinged with sadness. "We're not there yet, and he's not ours to fight over." "No," Evelyn agreed, "but something tells me our journey just became more complicated." As they finally settled to sleep, Clara stared at the rough-hewn ceiling and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She'd fled one trap only to find herself heading toward another. And now this, a good man with sad eyes who made her remember what it felt like to want something beyond mere survival. Outside, Luke remained on the porch, keeping watch as he'd done every night for 5 years, protecting strangers because he couldn't protect the ones he'd loved. In the barn, Cooper snored peacefully, trusting in Luke's vigilance. And in the cabin, two women lay awake, each thinking of scarred hands and gentle strength, of possibilities that shouldn't exist but somehow did. The frontier had a way of stripping things down to their essence: survival, loyalty, and sometimes unexpected grace. Tomorrow would bring more miles, more challenges, but tonight, in this small circle of safety, anything seemed possible. The morning brought difficult decisions. Cooper inspected the repaired axle and declared it would hold, but Luke argued for caution. "That repair is temporary at best," he said, arms crossed as he studied the wagon. "You hit another bad stretch of trail. It'll snap completely. Then you're stranded for good. We can't impose on your hospitality indefinitely," Clara said, though part of her wished they could. The ranch felt safe, a respite from the uncertain journey ahead. "Not an imposition," Luke replied, his dark eyes moving between both women. "Truth is, I was planning to head toward Fort Laramie myself, been putting off a supply run, and with these raiders about..." He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "I could escort you." 2 guns are better than 1, and I know shortcuts that'll ease the strain on that axle. Cooper brightened at this. Would be foolish to refuse. What say you, ladies? Evelyn and Clara exchanged glances. A whole conversation in that brief look. They both understood what accepting meant. More time in Luke's company. More complications to their already tangled situation. We'd be grateful for the escort, Evelyn said finally, her practical nature winning out. They spent the morning reorganizing the wagon, with Luke suggesting they leave some of the heavier military supplies at his ranch to retrieve later. As they worked, Clara noticed how he unconsciously positioned himself to help both women equally, careful not to show favoritism. Yet she caught moments, his hand lingering when he helped her down from the wagon, the way his eyes followed Evelyn when she laughed at something Cooper said. By noon, they were ready to depart. Luke had saddled a sturdy bay mare in addition to his black stallion. For scouting, he explained. Can cover more ground with 2 mounts. The first day of their expanded party passed peacefully. Luke proved to be an excellent guide, leading them along game trails that avoided the worst terrain. He was also a patient teacher, showing both women how to read sign in the dirt, how to tell fresh tracks from old, how to spot potential ambush sites. Your husband teaching you all this? Miss Hart asks questions like someone who means to remember. He observed as Evelyn correctly identified antelope tracks. I hope to have my own spread someday, Evelyn replied, chin lifted slightly as if expecting mockery. A woman should know how to manage land, not just a household. Sensible thinking, Luke agreed, earning a pleased smile from her. Land doesn't care if you're man or woman. It responds to hard work and respect, nothing else. Clara watched their exchange with mixed feelings. She was genuinely fond of Evelyn, yet seeing Luke's obvious approval of the younger woman's frontier spirit made her acutely aware of her own city-bred limitations. What did she have to offer except refined manners and an education that meant little out here? That evening, as they made camp near a small spring, Luke began teaching them to shoot properly. Cooper dozed by the fire, trusting Luke's watchfulness, while the women took turns with Luke's Winchester rifle. Don't jerk the trigger, Luke instructed, standing close behind Clara to adjust her stance. Squeeze it gentle, like you're pressing a flower. His breath was warm against her ear, and Clara fought to keep her hands steady. She fired, the shot going wide of the target he'd set up, a piece of bark on a distant tree. Better, he said anyway. You're not flinching as much. Fear of the gun is half the battle. When it was Evelyn's turn, she proved to have a natural eye. Her third shot hit the target squarely, earning genuine praise from Luke. You weren't exaggerating about those coyotes, he said. Where'd you really learn to shoot like that? Evelyn's expression darkened slightly. My PA used to drink. When he did, he'd sometimes bring home friends who thought a motherless girl was fair game. I learned to make my point at a distance. Luke's jaw tightened, and he nodded with understanding. Good for you. Man who can't respect a woman's no deserves whatever he gets. As the days passed, they fell into a routine. Luke would scout ahead, sometimes taking one of the women with him to continue their education. These rides became treasured by both, time alone with him away from watching eyes, chances to talk without the constant rattle of the wagon. On Clara's first solo scout with Luke, they climbed a low hill to survey the trail ahead. The vista was breathtaking, rolling grassland painted gold by the late afternoon sun, purple mountains distant on the horizon. It's beautiful, Clara breathed. Has its moments. Luke agreed, but he was looking at her when he said it. Then, catching himself, he turned back to scanning the landscape. There, see that dust? Another party, probably 2 days ahead of us. Too far to tell if it's commercial or private. How long have you lived out here alone? Clara asked, emboldened by their solitude. 5 years. Like I said, wasn't supposed to be alone. He dismounted to examine something in the dirt, but Clara sensed it was also to avoid her gaze. Mary, my wife, she had such plans. Curtains for the windows, garden behind the house. She wrote me letters full of dreams while I built our place. How old was your daughter? 3, Sarah. Had her mother's golden hair and my stubborn streak. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Mary wrote that she'd started asking why about everything. Drove her mother to distraction. Clara dismounted too, moving to stand beside him. I'm sorry. I can't imagine that kind of loss. Can't you? Luke looked at her directly then. Seeing too much? Maybe not death, but loss comes in many forms. Sometimes the person you lose is yourself. His perception made her uncomfortable, and she turned away. We should get back. Clara. Her name on his lips stopped her. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't define you. The woman I see is strong, intelligent, braver than she knows. Don't let anyone, past or future, tell you different. When they returned to camp, Evelyn was helping Cooper with the evening meal. She looked up at their approach, and Clara saw the flash of something, jealousy, worry, cross her features before she smiled. See anything interesting? Another party ahead of us. Luke reported, should keep our distance until we know their business. 2 days later, it was Evelyn's turn to ride scout. Clara watched them go with the same mixed feelings Evelyn had likely experienced. She tried to focus on mending a tear in her dress, but her eyes kept straying to the horizon where they'd disappeared. Difficult situation, Cooper observed. Startling her, she'd thought him asleep. I don't know what you mean, the old man chuckled. Sure you don't. 2 fine women, 1 complicated man. Seen this story before, though usually not with such quality folk. It doesn't matter, Clara said firmly. We're promised to Mr. Morrison. Promises made in desperation don't always hold in daylight, Cooper said philosophically. Besides, from what Carson says, Morrison ain't exactly prize husband material. When Luke and Evelyn returned, they were laughing about something. Evelyn's face bright with excitement. I saw a golden eagle, she exclaimed to Clara. Luke showed me its nest high in the cliffs. The babies were almost ready to fly. That night, Evelyn was full of stories about what she'd seen and learned, her enthusiasm infectious. Clara found herself genuinely happy for her friend's joy, even as her heart twisted with other emotions. The peaceful days couldn't last. On their 4th day traveling together, Luke's vigilance paid off. He'd been scouting far ahead when he came racing back, his black stallion lathered with sweat. Raiders, he said tersely. Same group, from the descriptions. They're waiting at Willow Creek Crossing, only good water for miles, and they know it. How many? Cooper asked, checking his rifle. 5 that I could see, probably have a 6th on watch. Luke's expression was grim. We can't go around, that Axel won't take the rough country. But I might have an idea. His plan was daring but simple. They'd approach the crossing at dusk, making camp just out of sight. Luke would circle around on foot during the night, get behind them. When the raiders moved to attack what looked like easy prey at dawn, 2 women, an old man, and 1 guard, they'd find themselves caught in crossfire. Too dangerous, Clara protested. What if something goes wrong? Then you do what we practiced, Luke said calmly. You and Evelyn ford up in the wagon and shoot anything that gets close. Cooper knows what to do. I don't like it either, Evelyn added. Using us as bait. You're not bait, Luke interrupted. You're frontier women who can handle themselves. I've seen you both shoot. Trust yourselves, and trust me. That night was the longest Clara had ever experienced. They made camp as planned, going through the motions of a normal evening while knowing predators watched from the darkness. Luke slipped away after midnight, disappearing into the shadows like smoke. Clara and Evelyn huddled together in the wagon, fully dressed, rifles loaded and ready. Neither could sleep. If something happens, Evelyn started. Nothing will happen, Clara said firmly. Luke knows what he's doing. You trust him, don't you? Evelyn was quiet for a moment. With my life, yes, with my heart. That's more complicated. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening by degrees. Clara's hands were slick with sweat as she gripped the rifle. Beside her, Evelyn breathed steadily, outwardly calm but for the white knuckles on her own weapon. The attack came with shocking suddenness. One moment the morning was still, the next filled with thundering hooves and savage yells. 6 men burst from cover, firing as they rode. Cooper dropped flat behind the wagon wheel, returning fire with methodical precision. Clara forced herself to aim as Luke had taught her. Squeezing the trigger gently, her shot went wide. But it made the raiders realize the wagon held more than helpless women. They split up, trying to flank the wagon. That's when Luke struck. His rifle cracked from an unexpected angle, taking one raider from his saddle. The attackers' cohesion shattered as they tried to wheel toward this new threat. And in the confusion, Evelyn's steady marksmanship found another target. The battle was brief but vicious. When the gun smoke cleared, 3 raiders lay dead. 2 had fled, and 1 sat on the ground, clutching a bleeding shoulder. His gun kicked away. Luke emerged from cover, moving carefully, rifle trained on the survivor. His shirt was torn, a graze on his arm bleeding, but he was otherwise unhurt. "Everyone all right?" he called, not taking his eyes off the wounded raider. "We're fine," Clara answered, though her voice shook. The reality of what had just happened, that she had shot at another human being, had helped kill, was beginning to sink in. Luke bound the survivor, who proved to be a deserter named Jake Wallace. While Cooper kept watch, Luke questioned him about the gang's other activities. The man, seeing his position was hopeless, talked freely about their crimes, including the family Luke had mentioned. "What do we do with him?" Evelyn asked quietly. "Take him to Fort Laramie," Luke said. "Let the law handle it." Though part of me, he didn't finish, but they all understood. They moved quickly after that, wanting distance from the battle site. The wounded raider rode with hands tied, sullen but subdued. The victory should have felt triumphant, but instead, a somber mood settled over the group. That evening, as they camped miles from the crossing, Luke sat apart, cleaning his rifle with mechanical precision. Clara approached him, settling nearby without speaking. After a while, he said, "First time you've been in a real fight?" "Yes. It changes you. Taking a life, even when justified. Mary never understood why I came back from the war different. Now you know." "You saved us," Clara said softly. "We saved each other," Luke corrected. "You and Evelyn held your ground, did what needed doing. That's not nothing." Evelyn joined them, bringing coffee. She sat on Luke's other side, and for a moment they were quiet. 3 people bound by shared danger and growing affection. The stars emerged one by one overhead, and somewhere in the darkness a nightbird called. "What happens when we reach Fort Laramie?" Evelyn asked eventually. Luke was quiet for a long moment. "I suppose you meet Morrison, sort out your arrangement, and I resupply and head home." But none of them quite believed it would be that simple. Too much had passed between them, looks and words. Danger faced together. The growing recognition that sometimes the heart makes its own plans, regardless of promises or propriety. 2 mail-order brides shared one wagon, Clara murmured, remembering Evelyn's words from that night at the ranch, and fought desire for the same fierce cowboy. "Still think that's how the story goes?" Luke asked quietly, looking at neither of them. "I don't know how it goes anymore," Evelyn admitted. "Maybe," Clara said slowly. "It's not about fighting. Maybe it's about choosing, all of us, what kind of story we want to write." Luke turned to look at them then, these 2 remarkable women who'd crashed into his carefully solitary life. In his eyes was wonder and fear in equal measure. "That's a dangerous thing to say, Clara." "Dangerous times," she replied. "Seems fitting." They sat together as the fire burned low, 3 souls at a crossroads, while Cooper snored peacefully and their prisoner nursed his wounds. Tomorrow would bring more miles, and soon enough Fort Laramie would force decisions. But tonight, under the vast western sky, anything seemed possible, even a love story that didn't follow the usual rules. Fort Laramie appeared on the horizon like a promise and a threat combined. The adobe walls and wooden palisades represented civilization after weeks on the trail. But for Clara and Evelyn, it also meant confronting the reality of their situation with Samuel Morrison. They reached the fort's outskirts by mid-afternoon, joining a steady stream of wagons, soldiers, and traders flowing through the gates. Luke rode ahead to turn over their prisoner to the military authorities, leaving the women with Cooper to navigate the crowded thoroughfare. "Never thought I'd be so glad to see people again," Evelyn said, though her voice held little joy. "Even if half of them are staring at us like we're some curiosity." Indeed, two women traveling together drew attention. Clara heard whispers following their wagon, speculation about who they were, why they traveled with only an old man as escort. She kept her chin high, a lifetime of social training serving her well, but inside her stomach churned with anxiety. They found lodging at a boarding house run by a German widow named Mrs. Steinbach, who clucked over their travel-worn appearance and insisted on heating water for baths. It was heaven to be truly clean again, to wear a fresh dress that didn't smell of campfire and dust. "You two sisters?" Mrs. Steinbach asked as she served them tea in her modest parlor. "Friends," Evelyn answered. "We're meeting someone here." "Ah," the widow's knowing look said she'd guessed their purpose. "Mail-order brides. Ja. We see many through here. Some stories happy, some—" She shrugged expressively. Clara set down her teacup carefully. "Do you know a Mr. Samuel Morrison?" Mrs. Steinbach's expression shifted, becoming carefully neutral. "I know of him. Has a ranch day's ride north. Comes to town for supplies. Sometimes entertainment." "What kind of man is he?" Evelyn pressed. The widow seemed to choose her words carefully. "He pays his debts, doesn't make trouble, but—" She paused, then seemed to decide on honesty. "He makes promises, many promises. There was another girl, maybe 6 months ago. She stayed here too, waiting for him. He came, looked her over like a horse at auction, decided she wasn't what he wanted, left her here with nothing." Clara and Evelyn exchanged glances. "What happened to her?" "She works at the saloon now. Only work for a woman alone out here, unless she has skills like mine." "Mrs." Steinbach's voice held both pity and warning. That evening, Luke found them in the boarding house parlor. He'd cleaned up too, his hair still damp, wearing a fresh shirt that made him look younger, less dangerous. But the gun still rode his hip, and his eyes remained watchful. "Prisoners delivered," he reported. "Military's grateful. Wallace was wanted for desertion and worse. There's a reward. Actually, I figured it should go to you ladies. Considering—" "We can't accept that," Clara protested. "Already done. Told them to put it in your names at the bank here. Consider it insurance." His expression was serious. "In case things don't work out as planned." "You think they won't?" Evelyn asked. Luke hesitated, then sat across from them. "I've been asking about Morrison. Man's not well liked. He's got debts. His ranch is struggling. Word is he's been advertising for a wife because he needs someone with money or connections to bail him out." Clara felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. "We have neither." "Which he'll discover soon enough." Luke leaned forward, his voice intense. "I know it's not my place, but you both deserve better than a man who sees you as a solution to his problems. What choice do we have?" Evelyn's voice was bitter. "We've come all this way. I can't go home, and Clara can't go back either." Clara finished quietly. "We're trapped." "No," Luke said firmly. "You're not. You're two of the strongest, most capable women I've met. You survived the trail, fought off raiders, adapted to everything this land threw at you. You have options." "Such as?" Clara asked, though her heart had begun to beat faster at the passion in his voice. Before Luke could answer, a commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they saw a man dismounting from a flashy sorrel horse. He was perhaps 40, dressed in what might have been fine clothes once but now showed wear and careless maintenance. His face was handsome in a soft way, with pale eyes and thinning fair hair. "Morrison," Luke said quietly, his voice flat. They watched as Morrison spoke to someone on the street, who pointed toward the boarding house. He straightened his coat and started toward the door. "I should go," Luke said, standing. "This is your business." "Stay." Clara said quickly, then flushed. Please, as a witness. Luke looked between them, then nodded slowly, moving to stand by the window as Morrison knocked. Mrs. Steinbach showed him in, her expression disapproving. Morrison swept into the parlor with false bonhomie, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he looked between Clara and Evelyn. Well, he said. This is awkward. I seem to have made a terrible mistake with dates. You must be Miss Whitmore and Miss Hart? Mrs. Whitmore, Clara corrected coolly. I'm a widow. Of course, my apologies. Morrison's eyes calculated as he took in their appearance. I must say, you're both lovelier than your letter suggested. This makes my situation even more difficult. Your situation? Evelyn's voice could have cut glass. You mean the situation where you proposed marriage to two women simultaneously? Morrison had the grace to look slightly abashed. A misunderstanding. I was corresponding with several ladies, perfectly normal in these circumstances, and I'm afraid my intentions were unclear. I certainly never meant for you both to make the journey. Liar. Luke's voice from the window was quiet but clear. Morrison's face flushed as he noticed Luke for the first time. Carson, I might have known you'd involve yourself, still playing the noble protector when needed. Luke replied evenly. These ladies deserve the truth. Morrison, tell them about your debts. Tell them why you really need a wife. Morrison's friendly mask slipped. My financial affairs are none of your concern. They are when you're planning to saddle one of these women with them. Luke countered. 20,000 to the bank, another 5 to various creditors. Ranch is mortgaged twice over. You're not looking for a wife. You're looking for a Jiu Xing. That's enough, Morrison snapped. Then visibly collected himself. He turned back to Clara and Evelyn with a practiced smile. Luke exaggerates. Yes, the ranch has struggled, but with the right woman's touch. Someone who understands economy and hard work. Someone with money, you mean, Clara interrupted. Or connections back east to secure loans. Morrison's silence was answer enough. I think you should leave, Evelyn said quietly. We've heard enough. Now, let's not be hasty, Morrison began. But Luke stepped forward, hand resting casually on his gun. The lady asked you to leave. Morrison looked between them all, calculation in his pale eyes. Fine, but don't think you've won anything. Carson, these ladies are here alone. No prospects, no protection. They'll come around when they realize their options. He tipped his hat mockingly. I'll be at the hotel when you've reconsidered. Good evening. After he left, the three of them stood in silence. Clara sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. Evelyn moved to the window, staring out at the darkening street. Well, Clara said finally, that was illuminating. I'm sorry, Luke said. You deserved better. Did we? Evelyn turned from the window, tears glittering in her eyes. We came out here chasing a lie, both of us. Maybe we deserve exactly what we got. Don't say that. Clara rose, going to her friend. We came chasing hope. There's no shame in that. Luke watched them embrace, these two women who'd become sisters through shared trials. His expression was tender and tortured in equal measure. What will you do now? He asked quietly. Clara and Evelyn separated, looking at each other, then at him. The question hung in the air, loaded with possibilities unspoken. Mrs. Steinbach mentioned work at the fort. Evelyn said slowly, laundry, cooking for the soldiers. You could teach, Clara added. The officers' wives might want education for their children. They were building castles in the air and they all knew it. Such work would barely provide survival. Certainly not the security they'd hoped to find, but it was better than Morrison's offer of genteel slavery. There's another option, Luke said carefully. My ranch needs help. I've been managing alone, but it's too much for one person. I could hire you both, provide room and board, fair wages. Luke, Clara began, but he held up a hand. Not charity, not anything else, Just work for pay until you figure out what you really want." He paused, struggling with words. "I know what people would say. A man and 2 women. But when has propriety kept any of us safe? Respectability didn't protect you from a violent husband. Clara didn't keep Evelyn's family from starving. Didn't save my wife and daughter from raiders." His voice had risen with passion, and now he stopped, breathing hard. "You're asking us to trust you," Evelyn said softly. "Yes," Luke admitted. "But more than that, I'm asking you to trust yourselves, to take time to decide what you really want, not what desperation drives you to accept." Clara found herself remembering that first night in his cabin, the careful way he'd insisted on sleeping in the barn, how he'd taught them to shoot not to impress but to ensure their safety. She thought of Morrison's calculating eyes, the way he'd looked at them like items on a store shelf. "What do you think?" she asked Evelyn. Evelyn was studying Luke with those clear blue eyes that missed nothing. "I think," she said slowly, "that we've already trusted him with our lives. Everything else is just details." Luke's face transformed with relief and something deeper. "There's a supply wagon heading back to my area tomorrow. Cooper's taking it. He's agreed to work for me through winter. You could travel with him while I finish business here." "When would you follow?" Clara asked. "Day or 2 at most. Need to bank the reward money properly, file some paperwork on the land I'm claiming." He paused. "Give you time to change your minds without me hovering." That night, Clara and Evelyn talked until nearly dawn, weighing options, fears, hopes. They spoke of Luke, too, carefully at first, then with more honesty. "I care for him," Evelyn admitted. "More than I expected, more than is wise." "So do I," Clara confessed. "But I care for you too, for our friendship. I won't let a man come between us, not after everything." Evelyn reached across the narrow space between their beds, taking Clara's hand. "Whatever happens, we decide together. No competition, no jealousy. We're stronger together than apart." The next morning, they gave Mrs. Steinbach their answer. The widow nodded approvingly. "That Carson, he's a good man. Tragic what happened to his family, but he never let it make him mean. You could do worse than trusting him." Morrison appeared as they were loading the wagon, his face mottled with anger. "You're making a mistake," he called out. "Carson's using you. You know, man like that, alone so long, he's not looking for hired help." "No," Clara said calmly. "He's not. He's looking for people to trust, same as we are. Goodbye, Mr. Morrison." As the wagon rolled out of Fort Laramie, Evelyn began to laugh. "Can you believe it? We traveled all this way to marry a stranger, and now we're traveling back to work for a different stranger." Clara finished, but she was smiling too. "Though I don't think Luke's a stranger anymore." "No," Evelyn agreed, looking back at the fort walls where Luke stood watching them leave. Even at a distance, they could feel the weight of his gaze, protective and longing in equal measure. "I don't think he is." Cooper chuckled from the driver's seat. "Told you that story would get complicated. 2 mail-order brides shared one wagon and fought desire for the same fierce cowboy. Though seems to me you ladies are too smart for fighting." "We'll see," Clara murmured, but her heart was lighter than it had been in years. Behind them, Fort Laramie faded into the distance, and ahead lay uncertainty. But for the first time in her life, uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden in the morning light. Somewhere out there was a ranch that needed work, a man who needed healing, and 2 women who needed to discover who they could become when given the chance. It wasn't the ending any of them had expected when this journey began, but perhaps that was what made it exactly right. The return journey to Luke's ranch passed peacefully, almost dreamlike compared to their earlier trials. Cooper kept them entertained with stories from his decades on the frontier, and without the urgency of reaching Fort Laramie, they could appreciate the land's harsh beauty. Still, both women found themselves watching the horizon for a lone rider on a black horse. Luke caught up with them on the 3rd day. appearing at sunset like something summoned from their collective hopes. He brought supplies from the fort, practical things like flour and coffee, but also small luxuries, a bolt of blue calico that would bring out Evelyn's eyes, books for Clara, peppermint sticks that made them both laugh like children. "Figured if you're going to work for me, might as well start off right," he said gruffly. But his eyes were warm as he watched their delight. They reached the ranch as the first winter winds began to blow down from the mountains. Clara pulled her shawl tighter as she surveyed what would be their home for the foreseeable future. In daylight, she could see both its potential and problems, fences that needed mending, a barn door hanging crooked, the garden plot behind the house overgrown with weeds. "Needs work," Luke said unnecessarily, a note of apology in his voice. "Everything worth having does." Evelyn replied, already mentally cataloging what needed doing. They settled into a routine with surprising ease. Luke and Cooper tackled the heavy repairs while the women transformed the cabin's stark interior. Clara discovered a talent for organization, creating systems that brought order to Luke's bachelor chaos. Evelyn proved gifted with growing things, coaxing the neglected garden back to life even as frost threatened. The sleeping arrangements were carefully proper. Luke and Cooper in the barn, the women sharing the cabin. But propriety couldn't govern the looks exchanged over meals, the way hands might brush when passing tools, or how naturally they fell into working as a unit. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, Clara stood at the window watching fat flakes drift past. Luke joined her, standing close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Beautiful," he murmured. Yes, but she wasn't sure either of them meant the snow. "Clara, I need to say something." His voice was low, urgent. "I know you came here to work, to figure things out, but I'd be lying if I said that's all I'm hoping for." Her heart hammered, but before she could respond, Evelyn entered from the bedroom, stopping short when she saw them. Something passed over her face, hurt, resignation, before she smoothed her expression. "Snow's starting," she said unnecessarily. Luke stepped back from Clara, running a hand through his hair. "I should check the horses." After he left, the two women stood in awkward silence. Finally, Evelyn spoke. "We said we wouldn't let this come between us." "No," Clara agreed. "We won't. But Evelyn, we can't ignore what's happening either." "What is happening?" Evelyn moved to the fire, holding her hands to the warmth. "He cares for you. It's obvious. He cares for you too. I see how he watches you, how his face lights when you laugh." They looked at each other across the room, two women caught in an impossible situation. Then Evelyn laughed, but it held tears. "What a mess. We escape one difficult situation only to create another." Winter deepened, bringing storms that trapped them inside for days. The forced proximity could have bred resentment, but instead it deepened their bonds. They played cards, told stories, shared memories. Luke revealed more of himself, his childhood in Tennessee, his service in the war, the dreams he'd built with Mary that died with her. One particularly fierce blizzard night, they huddled around the fire while wind howled outside. Cooper had produced a harmonica, playing mournful tunes that suited the weather. Evelyn sat darning socks. Clara read aloud from one of her new books, and Luke carved a piece of wood with patient strokes. "What are you making?" Evelyn asked. Luke flushed slightly. "Christmas is coming. It's nothing fancy." But when he finished, it was beautiful. A carved wildflower, delicate and perfect. He offered it to Evelyn almost shyly. "For your hair, maybe." Evelyn's face glowed as she accepted it, and Clara felt a pang that was equal parts joy for her friend and sorrow for herself. But the next evening, Luke presented Clara with a carved lark, wings spread in flight. "Because you sing when you think no one's listening," he explained. She clutched the small bird, throat tight with emotion. Across the room, Evelyn watched with understanding eyes. The tension might have become unbearable, but life on the ranch demanded too much work for extended brooding. There were cattle to tend, horses to train, endless repairs to make before the worst of winter hit. They worked from dawn to dusk, falling into bed exhausted but satisfied. One morning, Clara woke to find Evelyn's bed empty. Concerned, she wrapped herself in a shawl and ventured out. She found her friend in the barn, crying quietly while milking the cow.
"What's wrong?"
Evelyn wiped her face hastily.
"Nothing. Everything. I'm being foolish."
Clara knelt beside her in the straw.
"Tell me."
"I got a letter yesterday.
From home. Pa's dead. Drank himself to death. And my siblings—"
She broke down again.
"The neighbors took them in. But I should go back. They need me."
"Oh,
Evelyn."
Clara pulled her friend into an embrace.
"But I don't want to leave."
Evelyn sobbed.
"Is that terrible? I've been happy here, happier than I've ever been. I love the work, the land, the possibility of building something, and Luke."
Clara finished gently. "And you," Evelyn added.
"You're the sister I never had. How can I choose between duty to family and this life we're building?"
They held each other as the cow lowed impatiently.
"Finally."
Clara pulled back.
"What if you didn't have to choose? What if we could bring them here?"
Hope flickered in Evelyn's eyes. "Luke would never. Luke has a good heart and more land than he can work alone. Let's talk to him." They found Luke repairing harnesses in the weak winter sun. He listened gravely as Evelyn explained, his expression giving nothing away. "How old are the young ones?" he asked finally. "Sarah's 12, Matthew's 10, Annie's 7. Luke was quiet for a long moment, and Clara saw him wrestling with something. "Sarah," he said softly. "Same name as—" He cleared his throat. "They could come. We'd need to build onto the cabin, but there's time before spring. Children should be with family." Evelyn launched herself at him, hugging him fiercely before remembering herself and stepping back, face flaming.
Thank you. I'll work twice as hard. I promise."
"No need," Luke said. His own face reddened. "Family takes care of family." His choice of words hung in the air, weighted with meaning. The decision to bring Evelyn's siblings changed the ranch's dynamics. Suddenly, they were planning not just for winter survival, but for a future. A real home with children's laughter, expanded gardens, perhaps even a school in the nearby settlement. The work took on new urgency and purpose. During the construction of the addition, they all worked together, and the shared labor broke down remaining barriers. Clara discovered she enjoyed the physical work, the satisfaction of walls rising under her hands. Evelyn showed a talent for design, sketching layouts that maximized space and light. Luke taught them carpentry with patient hands, standing behind first one then the other to guide their movements. One evening, exhausted from raising roof beams, they collapsed around the fire. Cooper had retired early, leaving the three alone. The atmosphere was charged with unspoken words and possibilities. "I've been thinking," Luke said slowly, "about this arrangement, about what people will say when the children come." Clara's heart sank. Was he having second thoughts?
"Let them talk,"
Evelyn said fiercely.
"We know the truth. Do we?"
Luke looked between them. "What is the truth? That I hired 2 women to work my ranch? That's not all this is. Not for me." The crackling fire was the only sound for long moments. Finally, Clara found her voice. "What is it then?" Luke stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I'm not good with words, but these past months, you've brought life back to this place. Both of you. I wake up looking forward to the day because I know you'll be part of it. When I see Evelyn coaxing green things from the earth, or Clara teaching Cooper his letters, or both of you laughing over some shared joke." He turned back to them, vulnerable in a way they'd never seen. "I swore I'd never care again after Mary. It hurt too much, but you both slipped past my guard." "Luke," Evelyn whispered. "I know it's impossible," he continued. "A man can't, society says. But my heart doesn't seem to care about society's rules. I look at you both and I see home. Is that wrong?" Clara rose, moving to him. "The only wrong would be denying what we all feel." She looked back at Evelyn. "All of us." Evelyn joined them by the window.
the three standing close but not quite touching. My mother used to say the heart has reasons that reason can't understand. Maybe we stop trying to fit this into shapes others would recognize. Maybe we just let it be what it is. And what is it? Luke asked roughly. Love, Clara said simply. Complicated, unexpected, but love all the same. Luke looked between them. These two remarkable women who'd traveled so far, survived so much, and somehow found their way to him. People will talk, judge. It won't be easy. When has anything in our lives been easy? Evelyn asked. At least this difficulty comes with joy. Slowly, carefully, Luke reached out, taking one of each of their hands. They stood linked, looking out at the snow-covered land that was becoming theirs in ways none of them had imagined. We'll need rules, Clara said practically. Boundaries. Ways to make this work without jealousy tearing us apart. Agreed. Evelyn nodded. Honesty above all. No secrets. No favoring one over the other. And the children? Luke asked. How do we explain? The truth. Adapted for young minds. Clara suggested that sometimes families look different than expected, but love is what makes them real. They talked late into the night. Three people trying to map unmapped territory. There would be challenges, society's censure, legal complications, the delicate balance of three hearts trying to beat as one. But as dawn broke over the Wyoming mountains, painting the snow-covered peaks rose and gold, they felt the rightness of it. Cooper, emerging from the barn, found them asleep by the dead fire, Luke in his chair, Clara and Evelyn on the settee, but their hands still linked, forming a circle that seemed to exclude nothing and include everything. The old man smiled, adding wood to the fire quietly. "'Bout time," he muttered. "Been watching you three dance around each other like scared rabbits. Life's too short and too hard to waste love when you find it. However it comes." As the fire rekindled, warming the room, the three stirred but didn't wake, held in that peaceful space between dreams and dawn where all things seem possible. Outside, the wind whispered across the prairie, carrying the promise of spring and new beginnings for a family that would define itself not by convention but by the fierce, protective love that had grown from the ashes of their separate sorrows. The peace of their newfound understanding shattered on a moonless night 3 weeks later. Clara woke to the sound of horses, too many to be friendly visitors at this hour. She shook Evelyn awake, both women immediately alert. "Get the rifles," Clara whispered. Through the window, they could see dark shapes moving in the yard. Luke burst through the door. Cooper close behind. "Raiders, same group from before. They tracked us." His face was grim as he handed them ammunition. "They want revenge for their dead friends, and they know we're isolated out here." "How many?" Evelyn was already checking her rifle with steady hands. 8, maybe more. They're spreading out, trying to surround us. Cooper took position at the back window. "Built this place solid," he said with grim satisfaction. "They'll have a hard time getting in." The first shots came without warning, shattering the front window. Glass scattered across the floor as everyone dove for cover. Luke returned fire through the broken pane while the women took positions at other windows. "Carson!" A voice called from the darkness. "We know you're in there with your women. Come out and face us like a man, or we'll burn you out." "Jake Wallace's brother," Luke said quietly. "Figured he'd come eventually." The siege began in earnest. Gunfire erupted from all sides, the raiders testing their defenses. Clara forced herself to breathe steadily, remembering Luke's training. She fired at muzzle flashes, trying not to think about the fact that men were trying to kill them. Beside her, Evelyn was a steady presence, shooting with the same calm she brought to every task. "They're trying to get to the barn," she reported. "The horses—" "Let them go," Luke said harshly. "Horses can be replaced." But the raiders had darker intentions. Soon, the smell of smoke drifted through the broken windows. They'd set the barn ablaze, orange flames leaping into the night sky. "Trying to draw us out," Cooper observed. "Don't nobody get heroic about saving animals or property." The fire illuminated the yard, making it easier to spot attackers, but also backlighting anyone at the windows. A bullet whistled past Clara's ear, showering her with wood splinters. "Clara!" Luke started toward her, but she waved him back. "I'm fine. Stay at your post." Time lost meaning in the chaos of gunfire and smoke. Clara's hands cramped from gripping the rifle. Her ears rang from the constant noise. How much ammunition did they have? How long could they hold out? Then came a lull. The raiders pulled back, regrouping. In the relative quiet, they could hear the barn collapsing, sending showers of sparks into the night. "Why did they stop?" Evelyn whispered. Luke's expression was grim. "They're planning something." The answer came in the form of fire arrows arcing through the darkness, aimed at the cabin's roof. Most fell short or bounced off, but one caught in the shake shingles, creating a small flame. "I'll go," Cooper said, but Luke stopped him. "My job." Before anyone could protest, he was moving. "Cover me!" Luke slipped out the back, staying low as he climbed to the roof. The others fired rapidly, trying to pin down the raiders. Clara's heart pounded as she watched Luke's silhouette against the flames, beating out the fire with a wet blanket. A raider broke cover, running toward the cabin. Evelyn's shot caught him mid-stride, dropping him in the yard. Another tried to flank them from the left, but Clara was ready, her aim true despite her shaking hands. Luke slid back down, diving through the door as bullets chased him. "Roof's clear, but they'll try again." "Let them come," Evelyn said fiercely. Her face was streaked with soot and sweat, but her eyes blazed with determination. "This is our home. They won't take it." The battle intensified. Raiders charged in pairs, trying to overwhelm their defenses. Cooper took a grazing shot to his arm but kept firing. A window shutter splintered under heavy fire, leaving them more exposed. Then, just as their ammunition began to run low, Clara heard something that made her heart soar, a bugle call in the distance. "Cavalry!" Cooper wouted. "The Army Patrol! The raiders heard it too!" Shouts of alarm went up, and the attacking fire slackened as men ran for their horses. Within minutes, the night filled with different sounds, military commands, organized pursuit, the thunder of cavalry horses. "Keep watching," Luke warned. "Could be a trick." But soon uniformed soldiers appeared in the firelight from the burning barn. A young lieutenant approached the cabin carefully. "Hello, the house. I'm Lieutenant Morrison from Fort Laramie. We heard the gunfire." They emerged cautiously, weapons still ready. The lieutenant surveyed the scene. Dead raiders in the yard, the smoldering barn, the bullet-riddled cabin. "Seems you folks held your own," he said with admiration. "We've been tracking these outlaws for days. Got word they were heading this direction." "Morrison?" Clara asked, the name registering. "Any relation to Samuel Morrison?" The lieutenant's face tightened. "My cousin, ma'am, and a source of family shame. I apologize if he's caused you trouble." Luke almost laughed at the understatement. "Your patrol saved us." "Lieutenant, that's what matters now." As dawn broke, revealing the full extent of the damage, the soldiers helped round up what horses had scattered and clear away the worst debris. 3 raiders lay dead, and the patrol had captured 2 others. The Wallace brothers had escaped, but their gang was broken. "We'll post men here for a few days," Lieutenant Morrison offered, "in case they're foolish enough to return." As the immediate danger passed, exhaustion hit like a physical blow. Clara found herself trembling, the reality of how close they'd come to death sinking in. Evelyn wrapped an arm around her, equally shaken. "We survived," Evelyn murmured. "We're alive." Luke approached them, his face haggard but relieved. Without hesitation, he pulled both women into an embrace. Propriety be damned in front of the soldiers. "You were magnificent, both of you, warriors in your own right." Cooper, arm bandaged by an army medic, joined them. "In my 60 years, I've seen a lot of fights. Never seen one where everyone held their ground better. You ladies proved something here tonight." "What's that?" Clara asked weakly. "That this is your land now. paid for in blood and courage. Nobody can say different. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating their battered but still standing home, neighbors began arriving. Word of the attack had spread, and the frontier community responded as it always did to crisis. With help, men brought lumber for repairs. Women arrived with food and willing hands. Even some who'd looked askance at Luke's unusual household pitched in without comment. Facing death together had a way of making social conventions seem petty. Among the helpers was the settlement's unofficial mayor, Thomas Brennan. He pulled Luke aside, speaking quietly, but Clara caught the words. "After this, nobody will question your arrangements." Brennan said, "You've all proven yourselves. Besides, Frontier needs families that fight for each other, however they're made." The barn was a total loss, but neighbors helped rig temporary shelter for the surviving animals. The cabin repairs would take time, but the structure remained sound. As Clara and Evelyn served coffee and food to the workers, she marveled at the transformation, from outcasts to accepted community members in the space of one terrible night. That evening, after the helpers had gone, the four of them sat amid the destruction. The cabin still smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Wind whistled through bullet holes, but they were together and alive. "I'm sorry," Luke said suddenly. "I brought this on us. My past, my enemies, our enemies." Evelyn interrupted firmly. "Our home, our fight, our victory." "She's right," Clara added. "We chose this life. Luke, all of it. The beauty and the danger both." Cooper raised his coffee cup, a wry smile on his weathered face. "To the strangest and bravest family I've ever had the privilege to know, may your aim stay true and your powder stay dry." They drank to that, finding laughter even amid the ruins. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of rebuilding, but tonight they had each other in the knowledge that when tested, their bonds had held stronger than any conventional ties. Luke reached for his guitar, one of the few possessions undamaged in the fight. He strummed a few chords, then began singing in his rich baritone, an old song about home and belonging that took on new meaning in this moment. Clara and Evelyn joined in on the chorus, their voices blending with his. Cooper added his harmonica, the melody floating out through the broken windows into the vast Wyoming night. They'd traveled so far from that day at the Kansas way station, two mail-order brides sharing one wagon, fighting desire for the same fierce cowboy. But the journey had led them to something none had imagined, a love that defied convention, a family forged in hardship, and a home worth fighting for. As the moon rose over the mountains, silvering the prairie and hiding the scars of battle, Luke set aside his guitar and looked at his chosen family. "Whatever comes next, we face it together. Agreed?" "Agreed," Clara and Evelyn said in unison, their hands finding his in the darkness. Cooper nodded, adding another log to the fire. Wouldn't have it any other way. The night wind carried the scent of snow and promise. Soon Evelyn's siblings would arrive, adding children's voices to their unconventional household. The neighbors would talk, challenges would come, but they'd proven tonight that together they were stronger than any force that tried to tear them apart. In the flickering firelight, 3 hearts beat as one, while an old man smiled and kept watch, guardian of a love story that would become legend in the Wyoming territory. A tale of 2 women and 1 man who chose each other over convention, building a family from courage, trust, and the wild beauty of a land that demanded everything and gave back freedom in return. Spring arrived with a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers, transforming the battle-scarred ranch into something hopeful. The new barn stood proud against the sky, raised by neighbors who'd become friends. Inside the expanded cabin, 3 children's voices filled spaces that had been silent too long. Evelyn's siblings had arrived a month after the raid. Sarah, old before her time but blooming under Clara's gentle tutoring. Matthew, all gangly limbs and eagerness to help Luke with the horses. And little Annie, who'd claimed Cooper as her personal grandfather from day one. On this particular morning, Clara stood at the window watching Luke teach Matthew to rope a calf. The boy's face shone with hero worship as Luke patiently corrected his technique. In the garden. Evelyn and Sarah worked side by side, planting vegetables for the coming summer. Annie sat nearby, helping by making mud pies and chattering to Cooper, who nodded solemnly at her every pronouncement. "It's working," Clara murmured to herself, still sometimes amazed at the life they'd built. But change was coming, had been building like a summer storm. Clara had felt it for weeks now, a restlessness in Evelyn, a distant look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. That evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, Evelyn finally spoke. "There's something I need to tell you all." The family gathered around the table, even Annie sensing the seriousness of the moment. "I've had an offer," Evelyn continued, her hands twisting in her lap. "From the new school in town. They need a teacher, someone to help establish a proper education system. Mrs. Brennan recommended me." "That's wonderful," Clara said, though her heart sank. She knew what this meant. "It would mean living in town during the week," Evelyn explained. "Coming home only on weekends, and—" She paused, gathering courage. "Thomas Brennan's nephew has been courting me. James. He's a good man, kind, wants to start a newspaper. He's asked me to marry him." The silence stretched painfully. Luke's face had gone carefully blank, the expression Clara recognized as his shield against hurt. "Do you love him?" Luke asked quietly. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "I love all of you, this family, this life we've built, but I want something that's just mine. Can you understand that?" Clara reached for her hand. "Of course we understand. You're 19 years old, brilliant, beautiful. You deserve every happiness." "But I don't want to leave," Evelyn sobbed. "And I don't want to stay. I'm torn in half." Annie climbed into her sister's lap, patting her face with chubby hands. "Don't cry. Evie, you can visit lots." Luke stood abruptly and walked outside. Clara started to follow, but Cooper caught her arm. "Let me," the old man said. "Through the window." Clara watched Cooper join Luke at the corral fence. The two men stood in silence for a long while before Cooper spoke. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw Luke's shoulders shake, saw Cooper's hand on his back in comfort. That night, after the children were asleep, the adults gathered on the porch. The spring evening was soft with promise, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I want you to be happy," Luke said to Evelyn. "We all do. If this James makes you happy, then you have our blessing." "Do I?" Evelyn searched his face. "Tell me truly." "Luke, because I won't go if it destroys what we have here." Luke was quiet for a moment, then spoke with obvious effort. "What we have here is love. Real, complicated, but true love. That doesn't end because you choose a different path. You'll always be part of this family, always welcome here. Your siblings need to see you living your dreams, not sacrificing them." "And you?" Evelyn asked softly. "What do you need?" Luke looked at Clara, something passing between them. "I have what I need," he said simply. "Clara and we'll manage. We'll miss you fierce, but we'll manage." The weeks that followed were bittersweet. James Hartley proved to be everything Evelyn had said. Intelligent, progressive, completely smitten with her. He was respectful to the unusual family, understanding that Evelyn came with connections that wouldn't be severed. The wedding was small, but joyful, held in the meadow behind the ranch where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. Evelyn wore Clara's wedding dress, altered to fit, turning something that had held bad memories into a symbol of hope. Luke gave her away, his voice only slightly rough as he placed her hand in James's. "Take care of her," he said simply. "She's precious to us." "I know," James replied. "I'll spend my life trying to deserve her." At the reception, held in the new barn with half the territory in attendance, Clara found a moment alone with Evelyn. "No regrets?" Clara asked. "None," Evelyn said firmly. "This is right for me, but Clara—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "Don't let my leaving make you hold back. Luke needs all of you, not just the part that isn't worried about propriety or comparison to me." Clara kissed her cheek. "You're a wise woman. Evelyn Hartley. I learned from the best, Evelyn replied, then laughed. Remember when we were two scared women in that wagon? Sure, we were heading toward disaster. Instead, we found family. Clara finished. Just not the way we expected. As the party wound down and guests departed, Luke found Clara sitting alone by the creek. Moonlight turned the water to silver, and somewhere an owl called, "You all right?" he asked, settling beside her. "Yes, no, I don't know." Clara picked up a pebble, tossing it into the water. "I'm happy for her, truly, but I also feel untethered, like part of what made this work is gone." "Clara," Luke turned her to face him. "What makes this work isn't Evelyn or you or me separately. It's the choice we make every day to build something together. That hasn't changed." "Hasn't it? People accepted us partly because there were two women. It seemed less improper somehow. Now it's you and me and 3 children and Cooper. Still a family, just shaped different." He cupped her face gently. "I loved you both. It's true. But Clara, I fell in love with you that night on the porch at my ranch, talking under the stars. Evelyn was dear to me. But you're my anchor." Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks. "I don't want to be second choice. You're not. You never were. You're the woman who faced down her demons to come west, who learned to shoot to protect what she loves, who mothers 3 children, not her own, and makes it look natural, who looks at a broken man and sees someone worth saving." His voice roughened. "You're my only choice. Clara, the question is whether I'm yours." Instead of answering with words, Clara kissed him. It was different from the careful affection they'd shared as 3, deeper, more certain, carrying the weight of all they'd survived. When they returned to the house, they found Cooper teaching the children a new card game while James helped Evelyn gather the last of her immediate belongings. The scene was domestic, peaceful, exactly what Clara had dreamed of finding when she'd answered that long-ago advertisement. In the months that followed, they settled into new rhythms. Evelyn visited every weekend, full of stories about her students and the newspaper she helped James run. The ranch prospered with Clara's careful management and Luke's hard work. The children thrived, growing brown and strong under the western sun. One evening, as autumn painted the aspens gold, Clara found herself once again at the window where this phase of their story began. Luke joined her, as he had that snowy night that seemed a lifetime ago. "Any regrets?" he asked, echoing her question to Evelyn. Clara considered. "No, it's not the life I imagined when I left Boston. It's nothing like what I thought I wanted. It's better." Luke wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood watching their unconventional family. Cooper showing Matthew how to oil leather, Sarah reading to Annie, James and Evelyn arriving for their weekend visit. Faces bright with news. 2 mail-order brides shared one wagon, Luke murmured in her ear, and fought desire for the same fierce cowboy. Clara laughed, leaning back against him. And in the end, everyone found what they needed. Just not the way they expected. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here, from the desperation that drove 2 women west, through danger and uncertainty, to this moment of quiet contentment. The West had tested them, scarred them, but ultimately given them the freedom to create their own kind of family. Evelyn climbed the porch steps, her teacher's dignity forgotten as Annie launched herself into her arms. James followed, shaking hands with Luke, the 2 men who loved the same woman finding friendship in their shared desire for her happiness. "Clara," Evelyn called. "Come see what I brought from town." Clara squeezed Luke's hand and went to join her chosen sister, their voices mingling with the children's laughter as night settled over the Wyoming territory. In the window, a lamp burned steady and welcoming, a beacon of home for all who belonged to this remarkable family. The frontier had demanded everything from them: courage, sacrifice, the willingness to face both external dangers and internal truths.
In return, it had given them freedom from convention, the space to love as they chose, and the strength that comes from surviving the impossible together. As Cooper often said when telling their story to wondering neighbors, love finds a way, whether it follows the rules or not, and in this wild land, sometimes the most unconventional families are the strongest, bound not by what others expect but by what they choose to build together. The stars came out one by one over the ranch, watching over a family that had written its own rules and found its own happily ever after on the untamed frontier. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed following Clara, Evelyn, and Luke on their unconventional journey, please let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, passion, and adventure on the American frontier. Share your thoughts about this unique love story in the comments below. Until next time, partners.